Animating cameras in Blender can't be that hard. Place a camera somewhere over here. Let's add a keyframe here. Let's go a few frames further. Let's go to the other side so the camera should nicely spin around our little creature here. So let's play back. Yeah, okay, so I simply add another keyframe here, adjust this a bit, and then it should look pretty perfect. No. Yeah, as you can see, animating cameras in Blender can be a pain in the butt. Recently I created a little trailer for my updated Blender sculpting course, linked by the way down below in the video description if you're interested in sculpting. However, every time I create these kind of animations with different camera movements, I realize that it's so hard to animate cameras in Blender that they do exactly what I want to. So again, I experimented a bit with this and I think I found a pretty good solution to make it relatively easy to control each aspect of the camera motion in a controlled way. Yeah, hi everyone, Reinhardt here for cgboost.com and let's get started. To get started, here is a summary of the setup in less than 1 minute for everyone that knows Blender already and don't want to watch a long video. First, add a camera, a curve object and an empty object. Add a follow path constraint to the camera and add the curve object as target. Adjust the position of the camera so it is at the start of the curve. Then you can adjust the shape of the curve to alter the camera motion path. And now animate the offset of the follow path constraint to make the camera move along the curve. Then add a track 2 constraint to the camera and use the empty as target object. Enable target Z in the track 2 constraint, and now you can animate the position of the empty object to control where the camera is looking at, and you can also animate the rotation of the empty to change the role of the camera. Using linear interpolation for both the camera animation and the empty animation adds a consistent movement to the camera with constant speed. To add a change from one camera to another, we don't add a new camera, we just add a second pass and a second follow path constraint, and then we are animating the influence of both constraints to turn off the first one and enable the second one, from one keyframe to the next one, to change from one camera perspective to another. Now you have a nice cut and a fully controlled camera motion. And now let's have a look on how all this works in detail. Before we begin, there's a pretty nice tutorial by Polyfjord on YouTube where he shows a cool trick by using the auto keying function and key the camera motion you do while moving your camera around the viewport and then smoothing out these keyframes, which is a pretty cool solution. However, for me it was a bit hard to control and these didn't give me the full fine control I wanted to. However, I used this technique to experiment with the camera motions to get some ideas on what I want to animate later on, so definitely check out his tutorial, linked down below in the video description. Alright, first of all, let's have a quick look at the scene here and what we need to get started. So first of all, here we have the subject, which is this little cute creature, which we create in my sculpting course, including also all the shading and stuff like this. However, as you can see, the creature is pretty high resolution. It has 28 million faces, and since I'm using the multi-res modifier, we can simplify this by going to the render settings, and under simplify, let's enable this. Then it will reduce all the subsurf and multi-res modifiers to the maximum subdivision we define here. So in this case, maybe let's go with 2 to have at least a few details on the creature. Then to see the color of the creature, I'm here in the material preview shading and I have some effects like ambient occlusion and bloom and screen space reflections and also refractions enabled for the eyes. Then up here, let's select the scene collection, press C to create a new collection and call it render. So in the render collection, I usually pack everything which has to do with rendering, so camera, lights and so on and so forth. Then with this collection selected and with Shift C, the 3D cursor in the center here, let's hit Shift A and add a camera. Let's place it somewhere here. And with numpad 0 we can switch into the camera and we can use the walk navigation to easily navigate the camera. This we can do by going to View, Navigation and Walk Navigation. Let's right click and click on Add to Quick Favorites. Then we can press Q and click on Walk Navigation to enable this, and with left click you can confirm the new position of the camera. There's also a shortcut. In my case, since I am using a German keyboard, it's Ö, but not everybody has the Ö key, so you can also press the tilde key, which is the one underneath the escape key. So depending on what language keyboard you are using, this might be different. So using the quick favorites is definitely a solution that works for everyone. Now we have two problems here. First of all, we are zoomed in quite a bit because here in the camera settings, make sure the camera is selected. The focal length is set to 50 millimeters, which is a bit too much for me in this case. So let's reduce this to 30 millimeters so we can get a bit closer to the subject. And if I now move closer here, by the way, if you want to know all the shortcuts for moving around with the walk navigation, you can find them down below in this info bar. And one other problem is when I get too close here, you can see how this clipping is cutting away the creature. And in order to solve this, change the clip start to something like 0.01. And then we can get much closer to the creature without getting this clipping effect. And the other thing I really don't like is that we can see the scene around our camera view, which makes it a bit harder to visually see and understand what will be in our final image. So what I would recommend is to go to the viewport display settings when the camera is selected, here in the camera settings, and then increase the pass per 2. You can set this to 1, then everything around the camera will be completely black, but I like to set it to something like 0.99, so we can only see the rest of the scene subtle, so we can still select stuff which is outside of the camera view. So the last thing I want to do here is to split the view. Then over here, press the home key, or you can also go up here to view cameras and click on frame camera bounce. Then it will zoom into the camera bounce here. And then over here, we can go outside of the camera view and play around with the camera and see everything what's going on over here. So this is everything we need to get started. And now let's animate the camera. So let's get started with a simple dolly shot, and this is a cool trick I use all the time for simple left and right movements or moving the camera closer to your subject. And one little note here, in the output settings under format I changed the frame rate to 60 FPS to have a very smooth movement, and I'm using this resolution here, which is a 21:9 aspect ratio, to have this more epic cinematic camera look. So in doing this dolly movement is super simple. So we pick the first position of the camera, which might be something like this here. Let's go a bit down here, maybe go into the camera view, press Q, walk navigation, then change the view a bit. And when you are inside the camera, you can also press R when the camera is selected to rotate the camera, or double R to have this free rotation, which is sometimes useful, and you can hold down Shift to make like very precise adjustments. So maybe let's rotate this a bit like this, and then press I. And in this case, we want to add a keyframe for location and rotation at the first frame of our animation. And by the way, we can enable auto keying and also enable only active keying set. That means when we are making any changes to the camera, it will add a new keyframe automatically. But if we move any other object which don't has a keyframe already, no keyframes will be added to the other object then. Then let's go somewhere further down here in the timeline. At this point, I don't know how long the camera animation should be, so let's move the camera over here, something like this. And maybe let's rotate this a bit. And you can see down below in the timeline, a new keyframe was added. And by the way, we can also use the move tools here. So let's press G and then let's press Z twice to move along the local Z axis. So we can move this a bit further away, and holding down Shift helps us to fine control this. And I don't need to add a new keyframe here because this was added automatically. So now when I play this, by default, it will use a Bezier interpolation. So it starts slow, gets faster, and then it stops slow. By the way, by pressing P, we can also add a quick preview range down here, so we don't need to change the start and end over here. So, and this is now the dolly movement. However, when creating this animation with different camera shots, which are maybe edited to the flow of the music, I don't always want to break the flow of the camera motion by making the camera start slowly, getting faster, and then stopping slowly. I want to have a continuous flow of the same speed for the camera, so make sure the keyframes are selected down here, press T, and then change the interpolation to linear. That means the camera is now moving with the same speed all the time. And this helps to make this very nice professional shot over here. So this is very nice and it's pretty easy to adjust. So if I press arrow up and down, we can go to the two keyframes and maybe do a few adjustments. Maybe move a little bit closer here, and then press arrow up to go to the last keyframe. And I think here it's pretty perfect. So this works nicely for these linear motions from point A to point B. However, if I want to have a more curved motion, you can see that the camera is just going along one line here. But if I want to have like something like this here to add another keyframe to have more like a curved shape, you can see that this won't work. It will get this very ugly movement for the camera with a harsh turn over here. So, and how to solve this, I will show you now. So in order to make this work, let's first of all delete all the keyframes here. Let's press Alt-P to get rid of the preview range. And the camera, let's press Alt-R to reset the rotation and rotate this on the x-axis 90 degrees. So first of all, before we put the camera onto a curve, because we want to use a curve for the motion, let's add an object where the camera is always looking at. For that, make sure that you are in the render collection, hit Shift-A, add an empty, and in this case, maybe a simple circle. Then down here we can make this smaller, maybe something like 0.15. And in the object settings, viewport display, let's enable in front. So this circle is always in front of our objects. Then you can see, although auto keying is still enabled, since this object don't has any keyframes, we can move it around without a keyframe being added here. Although we have this auto keying on warning at the top right. Then let's place it somewhere here on the creature. Then select the camera, go to the constraints, and here let's add the track 2 constraint. As target, let's choose empty, but maybe let's rename this into camera target first. Then let's get back to the camera, pick the camera target over here. And now you can see that when I move this object, the camera always follows this object. However, now I can't rotate the camera anymore, but maybe I want to roll the camera later on doing the animation. So let's simply enable this target Z option here in the track 2 constraint. And this means I can rotate this object here and then the camera will rotate as well. So, and now we can also do this linear dolly movement here for the camera, and then it will always look on the creature, which can be helpful for the simple dolly moves as well. But here we want to create a more complex curved animation. So with Shift A, let's add a curve, and I like to use the pass object here. Then we have a line over here. If we go to edit mode, we have these 5 points which we can move around. However, I want to keep it simple here, so let's simply remove 2 of these points, and then we can place the pass somewhere here. So maybe we want to make something similar as before, that the camera is moving around the head of the creature. So in edit mode, make sure that this pass is now somewhere up here, but we can adjust this later on as well. Now let's select the camera. Let's collapse the track 2 constraint, and now I add a follow pass constraint. You can also use the parent option by selecting the camera, then the pass, pressing Ctrl P and click on follow pass, but then this will be animated automatically and you have to do a few adjustments in order to animate this manually. So I find adding this follow pass constraint is a bit easier. Here let's rename this pass into camera pass. And then we can pick this as target over here. You can see that the camera is now moving away a bit, but we can see this blue line which is pointing to the pass over here. So let's select the pass, go to edit mode, select this vertex here, press and hold Shift S and click on cursor to selected to move the 3D cursor over here. And then in object mode, select the camera, hold down Shift S and hover your mouse above selection to cursor and release Shift and S. And now the camera is here exactly at this spot. However, the track 2 is not really working anymore here. So all you need to do is to switch the order of these 2 constraints. So move the follow pass up and the track 2 should be second. So first the follow pass will be calculated and then this track 2. So and now all we need to do is to animate this follow pass constraint. So in this case, I want to make the camera start over here and end over here. So let's select this with Shift left arrow. Let's go to the first frame and add a keyframe over here. However, here I want to change this to be 100, negative 100 to be precise, which will define the beginning of the curve in this case. And since we have auto keying enabled down here, it will replace a keyframe whenever we do any changes over here. Then let's go a little bit further down the timeline and change this to 0 to get to the end, or in this case the beginning of the curve, and it will be animated automatically. And now let's see what's happening here. The camera is now nicely moving along the curve and it's looking at the target object. By the way, over here, if you like, you can middle mouse button click and move this to the side and disable all the overlays and gizmos to have a cleaner view. So now comes the cool part. Although this is a curved movement, we can still select both keyframes here with A, press T and add the linear interpolation. And now we have this linear movement along a curved path, which is pretty cool. One side note, by the way, the curve has not a perfect resolution right now, which we can maybe notice in a more jagged camera motion. So make sure the curve is selected, go to the curve settings down here. And if I decrease the resolution, you can see it better. We have these edges here and then the camera motion would look really weird. So make sure to crank up the resolution to a maximum of 64. And if you leave the render resolution at 0, it will pick the same resolution we have set up over here. And then we have this very smooth motion. Now let's adjust this animation a bit. First of all, let's go to frame number 1 here, select this target object. And by the way, maybe in this case, let's enable the selection restriction toggle over here and disable the possibility to select the creature and scene over here. So we can only select the camera and the target object. Then let's press T and enable the move tool. And up here, let's pick the local transform orientation so we can see the axis of this object here. And to make later on the roll rotation animation for the camera a bit easier, let's make sure that this object is pointing towards the camera roughly. And of course, it should have the height and the position we need. Something like this. Maybe let's go to the path in edit mode, move a little bit closer, maybe a bit more to the side here. So we can easily adjust what's going on here. Let's check the end position, which is okayish, I think. And in between, can also adjust this a bit more. And then let's animate this object here. And by the way, if you only want to see the keyframes of the selected object, simply enable this mouse cursor over here, and then we can see only the keyframes of this specific object. Then let's add a location and rotation keyframe over here, adjust this to point to the camera, and now we can adjust the roll by pressing R and rotating this a bit, something like this. And then let's have a look. The camera ends at this frame here, 355. And then let's adjust this accordingly here. Maybe to have something like this. So now, since the camera motion is linear and the motion of the target object has the Bezier interpolation, so it starts slowly, gets faster and stops slowly, it looks a bit weird. So in this case, I would definitely add the linear interpolation to this target object as well. So down here, select both keyframes, press T and click on linear. Then let's add the preview range with P, and then we can play back the animation here. So, and this looks pretty cool already. And as you can see, now you have full control over here. You can even make this curve longer here. And the two keyframes will always go from the start to the end of the whole curve. So, now you can see what you have to take care of is that you don't go too far away, then closer to the subject and then further away. So really make sure that the curve in this case looks pretty nice. So maybe we can go even a little bit down here. Now you can fine tune this as much as you like. And what you of course always can do is to select the path and with shift the target and then move the keyframes around here to make the whole motion faster or even slower if you want to change the timing for your animation. Okay, and now I want to add a second shot with a similar movement, just anywhere else here around the creature. So how do we approach this? Let's disable the stopwatch here to disable the preview range. And one way on adding cuts to different shots here in Blender is by pressing M down here to add a marker, then create another camera, and then you can bind a second camera to this specific marker, and then there will be a change from one camera to the other one. However, I don't really like this workflow because then at some point you have many different cameras in your scene and this can become a bit overwhelming. So I try to only work with one camera. So now switching from one camera perspective to another, all we need to do is to create another path. So this one here is moving around the head, and maybe let's add another one which is moving around the backpack here. So from the top view, let's duplicate this one, right click. Let's call this one camera path 2. Go to edit mode and then let's move this to the other side. something like this. We can adjust this later on. And now all we need to do is to animate that the camera is switching the path. So let's select the camera, go to the constraints, and here we need a second follow path constraint. So let's duplicate the first one. Let's call this one follow path 2, and here let's pick the other path. Now at the end of the first animation, let's animate the influence of both constraints. So for the first one we need the full influence of 1, and the second one we need 0 influence. So the second constraint is not influencing the camera right now. And now if we go one frame further, let's swap this. So we set the influence to 0 for the first one, and to 1 for the second one. And since auto keying is enabled down here, it will add the keyframes automatically. And now you can see how the camera is changing the position from one path to the other. So now we just need to animate the offset here. And I think here it might be cool if the camera is moving in the other direction to add a bit more dynamic to the shot. So let's see here, we need -100 as a starting point. Let's add a keyframe, and then let's go somewhere to frame 700 and set the offset to 0. And now the camera is doing this motion here. Let's select everything down here and press T and change this to the linear interpolation as well. And now we have this nice change. And of course you can do this as much as you like, so you can add even more follow path constraints. You can also easily change the timing here by simply selecting these two keyframes and moving them around. And of course you can also animate this object over here. So just go to the next frame here, and here we want to focus onto the backpack. And then let's see where the last keyframe was. It was at frame 700. And I don't know, maybe we want to change anything here, maybe the rotation a bit or something like this. And of course we can also go in here and change the position of the path. Maybe we want to go down here a bit. Let's go back. Here it's doing some pretty crazy stuff with the rotation. Let's select this one here. Then again, here I would take care that this is pointing towards the camera, and then take care that the rotation is not too crazy. Let's press arrow down to go to the previous keyframe and see how it looks. Yeah, I think not too bad. Of course, this is not perfect here, but this gives you an idea on how to work with the cameras. Now let's control space over here, press the home key, and now let's have a look. We have these two camera motions. Yeah, pretty cool. Now you have a good idea on how to precisely animate cameras in Blender, and I really hope that this is useful for your projects in the future. And by the way, you don't have to go with a linear interpolation down here. You can also go with a Bezier interpolation if you want to make the camera stop at the very end, for example. And you can also play around in the graph editor, but this would go too far for this video here and make this unnecessarily long. Yeah, and for the final shot I also created a setup where the light is adjusting automatically. I also animated the focus of the camera for the depth of field effect. And yeah, let me know in the comment section below if you want to have another video where I show you how I set this up. And again, besides animating cameras, if you enjoyed this little creature here and want to learn how I created this, check out my updated Master 3D Sculpting in Blender course. And if you want to learn all the shortcuts for Blender, we also have our free shortcut PDF. For that you can sign up to our free resource section. However, an email is required to sign up. That's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.